There's bad news. The producers have in fact confirmed that the next James Bond, which is going to be at least 2 years out, will in fact be updated for modern audiences, which, as we know, tends to be more often than not the death knell for just about any franchise if you actually want to create something that audiences want, because it's a myth. There is no such thing as updated for modern audiences. That's not a real thing. People know what they like, and that does nothing to do with being updated.
I have a bet. Clip it. This is like Miss Cleo Dane.
Okay.
The new James Bond for modern audiences within the first 15 minutes will have James Bond in therapy.
Ooh, somebody clipped that. That's not a bad idea, right? Because they would see like a government shrink or something like that, or they'll use it like
an MI6 shrink.
To be fair, they're kind of ripping off The Sopranos.
I could have seen them do that, because one of the things they point out on here is that they're never going to take James Bond to television. They're not going to, but I imagine that if they moved to James Bond to TV, it would be like The Sopranos, where it would be like an ongoing arc of James Bond in therapy.
He's going to go to therapy and he's going to be like, well, James, it must be hard killing all those people. And then they're gonna segue that to why he's a womanizer. It's like, well, maybe you should treat women better.
Well, they talk about that. They talk about how they said that Daniel Craig made James Bond a more emotional character. They talked about how they had to reinvent James Bond when Pierce Brosnan came on, because look, it was just after the Cold War. They said there's no more bad guys. Who's going to be the bad guy in a post-Cold War era? So it is actually true that yes, you do have to update things somewhat because the world changes. But what's funny about it is if you actually look at who the bad guys were between Brosnan and Daniel Craig, you'll notice that there's very similar themes that go on. So the first villain in a James Bond movie for Pierce Brosnan was an MI6, was somebody who worked for MI6, who was upset with the British government, who went on to become essentially a terrorist because he came to hate the British government because of what they did to his parents. He worked together with an ex-KGB colonel. After that, it's an evil media baron. That's still relevant today, is it not? The third villain was an anarchist, which is kind of, I feel like that would be hip now. Do like a proto-anarchist.
Society, man.
It was an anarchist working together with a billionaire's evil daughter. That's kind of awesome. Mm-hmm. These are all timeless ideas. And then the fourth one was like a communist who wanted to create a space laser. That one takes more to get into. But then when you get into Bond for Daniel Craig, which was starting back in 2006.
He's my favorite Bond, by the way.
Really?
Daniel Craig. Okay, so his first was essentially Le Chiffre, who was a guy who was funding terrorism. So he was like financing terrorism. And then after that, you have the head of an evil NGO, Dominic Green. All of these are still absolutely relevant today. Like, you don't need to change that at all. And then they go back to the evil MI6 agent trope with Silva in Skyfall. So they keep coming back to a lot of the same ideas. So I don't think you actually need to change that. I think you're right. I think the therapy idea is not a horrible one. And the question I had is like, look, they said he needs to be updated for modern audiences. Like, all of the ways in which we celebrate men now are different, but very different from what a government agent would do is probably not that much different now than it was 20 years ago, outside of how the internet would relate to it, right? A spy is still a spy now as he was 20 years ago, but what we as society celebrate in men is very different.
Here's why I think that's going to happen. It's because, so I feel like every time they say for modern audiences, what they mean is for women.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
But also, I think queer women. I think that's who they think they're chasing.
Progressive women, queer women, typically progressive, I'm guessing. And I remember the last X whatever tweet, lol, that had a bunch of traction. It was what I commented on a girl's tweet where she was like, I just wish men would go to therapy. I feel like it would do so much for them. And I was like, hey, I know you mean well, and bless your heart, but I wish that women understood that perhaps it does something different for them than it does for us.
Yeah, what works for you isn't necessarily what's going to work.
I think you're picking up on two really interesting themes, which is that therapy speak has bled into all aspects of cultures. I just heard a critique of this with the latest season of Love Island, which is not known for its witty banter, but people love it. That they all use terms like, just boundaries, and they use language that you hear on like therapy or self-development podcasts, especially ones that are more popular among women. You're also making me think of there was sort of this, it's probably still going around, but on Twitter for a minute, people would talk about, especially women, being like, I was meeting with my female therapist for 5 years, and then I switched to a male therapist, and within 6 months, I felt good enough to stop going to therapy. I think that the way men and women approach emotional issues are very, very, very different. And I also think that the industry of therapy has so many segments that are popular right now. Not only are more people than ever, including men, going to see therapists, but also the language that comes with it about emotional regulation or attachment style or boundaries, which I think are good. It's good for people to be able to speak, talk about things. No, I really do. I mean, this is a very female take, but I think it is good to be able to have a way to talk about more meta emotional issues with men, because I don't think men are naturally, it's not that they don't experience emotion, but that they process it differently. And so finding a way to get the genders to communicate better is good. But ultimately, the oversaturation of exposure to therapy makes people think that it's just the be all end all answer, which is why I think about this idea that, like, if you see a female therapist for years, you should maybe try seeing a male therapist and see if their approach is different.
I just see, I see with what a lot of people are using therapy for is that they're at disassociating and like paying for agency. It's like, okay, so I'm gonna pay you now, and there's this really hard decision that I don't want the consequence to make, and if you make it for me, then I can rationalize it, that like my life going this direction wasn't like of my volition.
Right.
And I feel that for me, adulthood and manhood, what being a man is, you become a man when your problems outweigh your immediate solutions, in my head. Like,
what do you mean?
This, for example, I'm just gonna give like a silly one that a lot of people, I mean, it's not silly, but a one that a lot of people have is like crippling student loans. And it's like, I'm not gonna fix this today. Try as I might, I could go speak to Kathy, the therapist, and it's I have to make a plan
and then
for
execute
the
plan.
future and execute it. So my problem, or let's say if like people can have issues, with their partner, with their family, with their job or whatever, it's like usually they can't solve it in a day. So being an adult is, I have this issue, it's going to take some work. I might have to do some things that I don't want to do, but I'm going to do them. Going to do them.
I have a question for you guys. So, like, think about your favorite story. You read a lot of books. You're a book fan. Think of your favorite stories. What is a story you would actually want updated for modern audiences? I can't think of any that benefit. I can't think of anything that I've ever liked where, like, if they remade it now, like, I've been very lucky. Most of the things that I've loved, the television shows that I've loved, the movies that I've loved, they're not part of franchises that have been pillaged by these studios, right? They've been, for the most part, left alone, or at least they're still new enough where I'm not gonna have to worry about seeing them redone for another 5 to 10 years, maybe, right? I can't think of anything that I love that would benefit from being changed for the sake of modern convenience.
Okay, I think that there's nothing that I love that I would want to see updated, but I'm going to caveat this in a second. And I have to say before that, if I love a book, I don't watch the movie adaptation. If I love a song, I don't watch the music video. I think that part of the way you experience art and literature is within your own mind and the images that you create and the experience you have while reading it. You don't need to add the flashing light box of any of this to make it more valuable. And that is to also say that there are gorgeous movies that are very impactful that I don't think you need to update. Like, when something is created and it has a meaningful impact on you, I actually really prefer to have it in the medium at which it was first created.
There's a $20 one here from DCNC. It says, Hannah Claire, name 10 books.
Name 10 books.
Do you want me to?
Go ahead, do it.
Okay, A Tale of Two Cities, Romeo and Juliet, Caesar.
That's a play.
A Gentleman in Moscow. I just read this one called Mr. Penultium's 24-Hour Bookstore. There's Lauren Graham has this book. Do biographies count? There's this one by Osa Johnson called I Married Adventure. There's I can't tell what number I'm on. Just let me know when I hit the
You're
end.
on, we need 7. We're on 7.
Okay. Truman Capote's In Cold Blood is a masterpiece. Everyone should read it. Let's see. I grew up on this series called Swallows and Amazons, which is British children's literature based in the Lake District. You could say Anne of Green Gables. It's also a piece of classic children's literature. There's Daisy Miller, which is a novella. I know I was referencing them before.
One more.
You could do Attorney of the Screw. Again, that's also a novella.
Guys, it has been done.
She did it. Like,
Incredible. And no Harry Potter.
Not a single Harry Potter.
Yeah,
No.
just name every single Harry Potter.
I saw a really funny thing, a meme the other day. It says it's all the Harry Potter books, but as if they were about Ron, and they're all just really degrading book names.
Oh my
Like
gosh.
book 7 is called like Ron Weasley Escapes the Friend
The
Zone.
thing is, Ron Weasley is the more relatable character.
He's
when
not.
he's like a weirdly talented Harry, you need also a character that struggles, and that way you can put yourself somewhere between the two of them. The thing I was going to say before was. Also, I love that super chat. That was really fun.
More like that, ladies and gentlemen.
I think it's fun to have these like interactive conversations. Like, what do you guys want to know from me? But the thing about this is, I wouldn't want one thing that I love to be just immediately updated with the same character names or else. But I think some of the things that I love about, especially like classic literature, maybe classic children's literature, are the values that I would love to see presented in the real world. So like another book called Pollyanna, and again, this is a children's book, but the idea is that it's this young girl, and it coins the term someone can be Pollyanna-ish, meaning that they're like always too optimistic. I don't know how often you guys hear this term.
So
But
there's say it again.
Pollyanna. You could be, like, you might call someone a Pollyanna or say they're Pollyanna-ish.
So Pollyanna-ish. Are there Pollyanna-ish polyamorous people?
I don't know.
I bet you there
That has
are.
nothing to do with polyamory, but this idea of like you have this sort of useful perseverance, and she's like a young girl who's been through hard times, and she goes to live with like some maiden aunt or whatever. But part of it is this idea of like falling back on optimism and perseverance. Like, I think those values would be cool to see more of in modern culture. I think so much about updating something for modern culture ends up being about how can we breed or read victimhood into these scenarios. And I would rather see aspirational content, which I tend to feel I see more, especially in older literature.
So-
Yeah, there's very little in the way. I feel like much less of society is aspirational these days.
So what for you're saying, I guess you're saying like you want one-for-one adaptation, but you'd like the archetype and the thematic to be...
Yeah, I wish we could maybe, like, if I could read something and be like, I think I really like this because it had me feel like this, and I think it portrayed these values or this type of culture. I want those things, but do not take the characters I love, do not take the settings I love, and essentially, I don't know if I can say this on here, bastardize them and make them these terrible, imperfect ripoffs that don't ultimately serve or convey the same meaning and message.
Brad, shut it down. She said bastardized.
Can I say that? I feel like that's
You
a
can
real
say
term.
that.
Is that a curse word? I can never remember.
There's one other thing I want to address about James Bond that I find very interesting that I feel like they have a problem with these days is how much does globalist Hollywood actually believe in characters that carry a certain sense of patriotism? Maybe because it's not American patriotism, it's okay. But it feels like much of the world these days wants you to believe in kind of a one world, we're all the same.
And I think
borders aren't a thing.
I think that's been going on for a long time.
Yes.
I mean, look at Imagine by John Lennon, where he says, "Imagine a world with no borders and no religion too." I mean,
I heard Gal Gadot sing it, and I loved it. It was great.
but it was there for her
Swoon.
to sing way before. I think patriotism is one of the issues. I think sort of morality generally, having people who sacrifice for their morals or who say like ultimately my life after earth is, and again, like I'm coming from a Christian perspective here, my life after earth is meaningful and like the impact of eternity is forever, and so therefore the actions that I have right now I have to govern it with my eye set higher than that. And I think even if you don't want to read into it from a religious perspective, again we go back to the idea of like aspirational morals, and that there are some things that are worth not just indulging in self like in momentary culture. Do you know what I'm saying?
It's funny because not just that, like I feel like there's been a steady push away from the idea of patriotism as far as you should be proud of your country, where you're from, but also similar to what you said about coming from a Christian perspective is like there's been an increased attempt in the last several decades to give a more atheistic approach to these industries. God is very rarely used in positive tone.
Oh, yeah.
No, and the religious characters always have something wrong with them. Either they're super weird sheltered homeschoolers who eventually go wild or whatever else, or they're the evil people. Like, there are very rarely depictions of just kind of an average Christian who's not perfect but also does have some kind of faith. And I think that's why, what I was going to say before is, I think that's why sometimes people seek out therapists, because they are looking for some way of saying, like, did this person wrong me? Did I wrong them? They have no way to experience and think about their values outside of talking to a therapist, because they don't attend religious church services. And I will say, like, if you're not religious, this could also be achieved maybe through listening to a lot of like philosophy podcasts, or like some way to reconcile, like, why does something feel wrong or why does something feel right, and where do I set my boundaries? And so they turn to a therapist because it comes out in a sense of anxiety because they have no way of governing the world. I think these ideas, these philosophies, these religious things ultimately make us better people because they make our minds think about things more than just the moment. They make us think about beyond.
I watched a movie this year that I really liked called The Hill. It's about this guy who he was disabled and he went on to pitch in the minor leagues, and he comes from his father's a pastor. And it's really interesting. It was really good, and it actually did show religion in I mean, it had its moments, but it took place in the 50s. I might have been the 60s, so it was like a long time ago, but it wasn't inherently overly harsh to Catholicism, right?
Right.
But it was also an independent film. It wasn't like it was made by a big studio. It was made by a company called Briarcliff, which is not a big budget studio.
Yeah. I mean, when you think about it, how many people, you used to get these numbers, right? Like, I don't know them, but 60 million people tuned in for the first night of, season 5 of Game of Thrones or whatever it is. And that was on probably a Saturday or a Sunday. Everyone made a point to be there to see this thing. Great. You love entertainment, but how many people make a point to spend time every week thinking about the kind of person they want to be, or how they're, like, what's going to happen to their soul, or what their values are, or what philosophical perspective they're going to approach the world with. And I think the thing is, if you can make time to show up for a movie premiere, if you can make time to see the first episode of a series, you should actually want to carve out church services are like an hour or two, or whatever you're into, to think about, how am I reconciling my emotional state and my values to the world around me, and what am I going to try to pursue and carry forward. I think so much of people avoiding, religion or philosophy is because it asks you to strive better than you are. It asks you to reach higher, and people don't want to be pushed out of their comfort zones. They want to live in these sort of base instincts and emotions. And that's why we have to remake all of these classics to be like not about aspirational values or aspirational stories. We have to make it to be like, well, you're justified for doing this thing because you were oppressed, or here is why you are allowed to not be the best character, or why we don't want to see this person succeed, we want to see this person succeed, rather than like moving forward with an actual philosophy on life. It's about kind of wrecking things in the past to make yourself feel better in the moment.
The Bond movies, what's funny about that is, for the Bond movies, I feel like their change is necessary. Like they mentioned, the villains have changed. The archetypes stay the same, but they come about current day. Like, okay, so when he talks about in GoldenEye, that's Trevelyan and the dude who's like the KGB, he was like an ex-KGB colonel, right? That's indicative of the Cold War and what happened at the time period. When you update it and you get Lashif and he's funding terrorism in the Middle East and stuff like that, or the Horn of Africa, that's very relevant to what was going on in 2006. I don't know how they're going to do that in a way that's not going to piss someone off for a movie in
QAnon, whatever.
Yeah. That's honestly, that's sadly, but probably pretty close to true. So we'll see what happens. It'll be interesting to watch them try, but I don't have the utmost faith in it, because I don't think they really have any faith in keeping a classic story that's pro masculinity, and really the archetype is like the male, that's like the male power fantasy, right? Women want to be with him, guys want to be him. That's the way it is. They're not interested in keeping that the same, because Hollywood has worked very hard over the last couple of decades to change that aspect of masculinity. So thanks for watching. Listen to full episodes of Pop Culture Crisis on Spotify.
Keep up with us on social media, and make sure you subscribe and ring that bell so you never miss the show. Bye, guys.